Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. My name is Muhammad Ahmed Pansota, and I am an advocate Supreme Court of Pakistan, practicing in Lahore, Islamabad and Karachi and other cities of Pakistan for the past 21 years. I have been actively involved on the litigation side, and the topic that I have chosen to speak on is how have the courts been influential, how have the courts been, I would say, effective in terms of interpreting the law. And in doing so, whether the courts in Pakistan have been legislating, or in other words, making law as well, which on the other side is the Parliament's domain. See, first of all, the most important thing that needs to be clarified is that Parliament's role entails legislation and lawmaking. And under the Constitution of Pakistan 1973, there is a process which is prescribed. Laws are framed, they are made, drafted, presented in form of bills before the National Assembly, and then sent to Senate and eventually passed by the President of Pakistan. But in a country like Pakistan, where there has been excessive political turmoil, where things have always taken a negative turn or a left or a right turn, you needed these alternate methods of making laws. You see, what happens in Pakistan, or what happened in Pakistan in the past, was the judiciary has been very, very active as far as lawmaking is concerned. Now, these are two concepts which obviously don't resonate with each other: lawmaking, judiciary. Judiciary is mainly responsible for the interpretation of law, as I've just said. But in doing so, judiciary in Pakistan has done some exceptionally good things. And I got the chance to write on this subject as well. And the article was titled as DW model, which is the domestic workers model. And I'll start off with that case first. What had happened was that there was a case which was filed before the Honourable Lahore High Court, and a law was sought to be made in particular connection with the domestic workers. Eventually, that case came up before the Court of Justice Jawad Hassan, and who had directed for a committee to be formed. And after the formation of that committee presented a law which later took form as Domestic Workers Act 2019. So this is where judiciary was very instrumental in getting the law made. They catalyzed the process, they ignited the process whereby legislation was done. One of the main criticisms that the governments, or at least my criticism on several governments in the past, has been that they have done possibly everything under the sun except legislation. And to sort of ignite that legislation, to sort of take that legislation forward, judiciary has, I would say, played enormous amount of important role. Secondly, I would like to give another example, is the law that related to food and the wastage of food. I was a petitioner in that case, and the case was titled as Muhammad Ahmed Pansota versus Federation of Pakistan. In that particular case, and before I sort of give the details of that case, I had requested several parliamentarians to take up this subject before the Pakistan National Assembly, Provincial Assembly, and I wanted a law to be made on food wastage. But unfortunately, this was never done. So I was constrained to file a constitutional petition, and through that petition, what I had sought was that there is no law in the country that deals with food wastage. Every now and then, I used to go around in the weddings, restaurants, and I would see wastage of food. So eventually, court was very instrumental in getting that law made. Several international treaties were cited in the judgment, and a full-fledged judgment was passed, based on which, during the process of that proceedings, Punjab Food Authority came up with detailed regulations, and these regulations later formed part of the law, which are going to be implemented soon. Then, if I take your attention to several other cases where judiciary has been very, very instrumental. Of late, once again, Justice Jawad Hassan has recently passed a judgment on the rights of differently abled persons, and that Sana Khurshid judgment is cited all along in different quarters of the country. For the first time, differently abled people got their rights in letter and spirit. Then once again, Justice Mansoor Ali Shah. It took Pakistan 60 years to realize that the international terminology for the differently abled persons is differently abled persons, is not disabled persons, other names that we associate with them. So once again, a judgment was required. And I can go on for maybe years narrating different judgments which have been very, very instrumental in developing law, in making law and which otherwise falls within the domain of the legislature. So this is why I feel in a constitutional democracy, when courts in Pakistan have the power under Article 199 of the Constitution of Pakistan to direct and to sort of inquire into matters at times, then that power should be exercised and has been exercised in the past in terms of legislation as well. There is another power which rests solely with the Supreme Court of Pakistan, which is Article 1843, where Supreme Court can take up any matter which involves a matter of public importance and there is violation of a fundamental right. And Supreme Court has done that several times. I would like to cite one example, which was the case of corruption of Mian Mohammad Nawaz Sharif. So that case was taken up at that level. And there is a very special provision in the Constitution, which is also in the Indian Constitution, which says Article 1872, which says that in discharge of their duties, the Supreme Court of Pakistan, they can do complete justice in deciding a case. So now this complete justice provision is a godly power, I would say, so as to say, which has been vested in the Supreme Court of Pakistan. Alongside that, Indian Supreme Court has this power unfettered. In Pakistan, you can't exercise this power to challenge the structure of judiciary. So this entire discussion that revolves around the basic and the most fundamental role of judiciary, and this is a slight deviation from that role. And when judiciary talks about interpretation of law, as I would cite the example of a very recent interpretation of law which has been sent to the Honourable Supreme Court of Pakistan, that is in connection with Article 63A regarding the defection. So a formal opinion has been sought under Article 186 from the Supreme Court of Pakistan. The courts in Pakistan, Supreme Court and the higher courts, they have vast powers that I've already mentioned, and courts in Pakistan have been exercising this power generally in a very decent way, in a very progressive way. There have been grave abuse of this power as well, where military coups have been justified, where several other things have been justified. That I would call as an excess of this power. But largely on the whole, judiciary in Pakistan has been behaving very, very responsibly. Then that, as I'm speaking, reminds me of judges such as Justice Shahid Kareem. He's passed a concept of water justice in Pakistan, climate justice in Pakistan. Then we've got Asghar Laghari's case where smog was dealt. All of these cases, this, merely and solely point towards one thing: inaction on part of the legislature, which gives judiciary the room to intervene and then pass judgments which are for public good. Then you see so many judgments being passed on public parks. Then you see judgments being passed on state amenities, these plots, these China cuttings. I can go on for years as far as judiciary's role is concerned. I do agree this is not their role had the legislature been performing their functions properly. But unfortunately, we live in a society where judiciary has a very, very strong role to play. You've got well-educated people sitting there who, majority of them have been very, very good lawyers while they were practicing. So when they sit on such high positions, they get this chance of deciding cases which obviously have far-reaching consequences as far as Pakistan's fate is concerned.